June 4th, 1989. Tiananmen Square, China. The riot reaches its climax. In the streets, protesters taunt the soldiers and vandalize army vehicles. All surrounding streets have been blockaded. Cars and trucks, set on fire, serve as barricades. The soldiers open fire. Weapons suited for war, such as tear gas, tanks, and machine guns, are waged on citizens. So what led to this? How could such a significant event have been so completely erased from China's history? A rising of the people and the crackdown of an unyielding government. A buried moment that served as an emblem of democratic hope. After Mao Zedong's death in 1976, power to lead the Chinese Communist Party was passed to Deng Xiaoping. Under Deng's leadership, China underwent numerous economic reforms.
China opened a door around early 1980s. So at that time, all of a sudden, like the door of the country all of a sudden opened, people start seeing a lot of other side of the world, if you will, and people start sense that the political system in China it was not really advanced enough. What we learned later on that within the government itself, there are actually two sides of the political forces. One is the hardcore, the party interest is always comes to first, everything else comes second. That's one side of the political force. And then there is a more moderate force at that time within the government. I think the leader of that force is Zhao Ziyang. He was prime minister of the country, which was officially second man after Deng Xiaoping. He was actually put under the house arrest since that event. He was removed from the power.
On April 15th, news of the death of Hu Yaobang, the liberal reformer who was expelled from his position as Communist Party General Secretary 2 years earlier, led to public mourning by college students in Beijing. The gatherings in Tiananmen evolved into an act of defiance against Deng Xiaoping and other party elders. Students congregated in the square, choosing to fight for Hu's ideals of democracy. They drafted a list of pleas and suggestions, which came to be known as the 7 Demands. April 26th, the turning point. The editorial, The Necessity for a Clear Stand Against Turmoil, appeared in the People's Daily, a state-run newspaper. The Tiananmen Papers, a compilation of government documents relating to the protests, revealed Deng's opinions in the editorial. He declared that the party must be explicit in opposing the protests.
This was Deng Xiaoping making clear his disapproval of the demonstrations, and this was a very powerful thing because, again, he was the strongest figure in China politically at the time, and when he spoke, it was a very important occurrence, and he made very clear in this editorial that he considered the demonstrations to be turmoil, which is a buzzword that implies that it could lead to chaos and disintegration of the state. And so in that sense, it was his declaration of where he stood, and because of his position, it was very important.
The editorial, claiming that opportunists had plotted a revolution to overthrow the government, enraged students. On May 5th, students organized hunger strikes in the square. More than 3,000 people fasted. The Politburo Standing Committee declared martial law on May 18th. Zhao Ziyang did not attend the committee meeting due to disagreement with the party elders. He advocated negotiation and stressed the government to address complaints, such as the need for political reform. He was soon removed from office. 2 days later, an army was sent into Beijing.
I actually went to the Tiananmen Square to see there were a lot of tanks parked there. The motor was actually running the tank. I can see like smoke coming out of the tank, and there were soldiers standing on the tank. And I remember one scary moment was all of a sudden tanks started moving, and the crowd was all of a sudden just panicking and running towards the other side of the street. And I was running along the street, and the tank actually started driving towards there. At that time, I saw a soldier shot towards the sky with a machine gun, so it was quite scary.
June 4th, the crackdown. Rickshaw drivers picked up casualties in the no man's land between soldiers and civilians. Protesters were shot in the back where they attempted to escape. Tanks refused to stop for men who stood in their way. By June 5th, the party's official estimate tallied 241 dead and 7,000 wounded. June 4th marked the end of a relative press freedom, and media workers faced heightened restrictions following the aftermath. To purge sympathizers of Tiananmen demonstrators, the Communist Party initiated a 1.5-year-long program similar to the anti-rightist movement. 4 million people were investigated for their role in the protests. Many student leaders, such as Chai Ling and Wu Kai-shi, faced criminal prosecution. Due to the eradication of all facets of the revolution, it is said that no one outside the incident truly knows what happened, and they probably never will.
Government changed a lot of system within the college. I remember at the time, any new students enrolled into college will be put onto 1-year military training to make sure they were politically aligned with the government. Every anniversary, they put very tightened security in Tiananmen Square to prevent anything similar from happening.
Tiananmen was one of the earliest efforts by U.S. news media to devote nonstop coverage of an international news event. There were many journalists in the right place at the right time to fully document the protests and massacre.
We picked up a woman with a bullet in the head and took her to the nearby children's hospital, into a scene of near mayhem.
Are thought to have been killed in the crushing of the students' revolt in central Peking.
The power and extent of media circulation is best demonstrated by the infamous Tank Man.
The image of his bravery and being broadcast on CNN or BBC, and a lot of world media put that image in front of everybody. So eventually this image became a symbolic view of the Tiananmen protest and movement.
Images of the protests would strongly shape Western views and policy toward the PRC throughout the 1990s and into the 21st century. China's image as a reforming country and an ally against the Soviet Union was replaced by that of a repressive authoritarian regime. As a result of Tiananmen, US, Canada, and European countries reassessed their policies regarding China and Taiwan. Originally, many Western countries believed the solution to the Taiwan question was a reunification of China and Taiwan. It was consequently realized that the reunification would just bring dissolution and put the formerly free Taiwanese under a more communist regime. The Tiananmen protests were frequently used as an argument against trade liberalization with mainland China and as evidence that the PRC government was an aggressive threat to world peace and U.S. interests. For almost 3 years after the protests, the rest of the world placed severe economic sanctions on China. The United States and several European countries stopped their exports of weapons to China, announcing an official arms embargo. Tiananmen Square is unique in that, in regard to human rights, the protests led to a serious period of anti-reform. Although the Tiananmen protests significantly impacted both national spirit and international morale, the effective crackdown of the communist government inhibited the ability of movement towards social liberty and change. Today, more than 20 years later, the buried revolution seems to be completely erased from China's self-proclaimed history. However, continued fighting for increased personal freedom communicates an ongoing struggle. To this day, the fire is still burning.
It seemed at the time to be very significant indeed, and led to a strong reaction from other countries. From the current perspective, it seems a lot less significant event than it seemed at the time, but it may very well be that at some time in the future it will seem more significant because there may be, who knows, another reform movement.
Now 20 years plus passed by, you looked back, you thought about the campaign, the slogan, the goals. I do not think overall China really were ready to move to a truly democratic system.
Alexis de Tocqueville once said, "In a revolution, the most difficult part to invent is the end." Perhaps this is the case of Tiananmen Square, 1989.